Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Sam Gabriel here, and welcome to What If Deku Could Manipulate Gravity, Part 10. Just wanted to greet you guys by just saying sit back and relax, you're in for a treat, so we begin. You ready, Kacha? Izuku and Bakugo stood at the entrance of their final exams, and the blonde smirked, sweat dripping from his face. Hell yeah, I am. I'm gonna make All Might regret holding back on us. The sound of the speaker announced their introduction, and the gate slowly opened. All eyes were on the two boys. It was time for their fight. What's Midoriya doing? The students who stood in the observation room watched as Izuku immediately split from his partner and sat on the ground. Instead of showing any signs of attack, he just casually pulled out a timer and watched his blonde friend approach the city street. You don't think Midobro was serious when he said they were going to try fighting All Might by themselves for a bit, do you? The greenette had only hinted at the preposterous thought, but after taking into account the duo's personality, everyone just sighed. From what they could tell, each boy plans to fight the number one hero alone before actually coming together to take him on. Your 7.5 minutes start now, Kacchan. Okay. As the blonde marched right down the main road of the false city, a sharp gust of wind caught his attention and the boy braced himself. The expectation was an understatement, however, as a hurricane of dust was suddenly upon Bakugo. Instinct drove the teen's body back, and it was a good call as a lamppost slammed into the ground where he had stood. The symphony of destruction crescendoed as the crash of a car and the creak of a building joined in. Dirt and rubble were all anyone could see, and when the dust cloud finally settled, Bakugo was met with destruction in its wake. Damn, Izuku whistled, as he saw the middle of their training field completely demolished. A whole row of buildings was just obliterated. The entire arena had been split in half, and it was devastation at every angle. Everything was eerily silent until the sound of footsteps approaching suddenly echoed out. Like a haunting heart, the thumping steps reverberated around the air, and it was enough to send a shiver up everyone's spine. The class watched with bated breath as the opponent revealed himself, emerging from within the mess like a hungry predator. I am both terrified for those two and so glad to know that All Might isn't a real villain. Mina's comment made many others nod. It seemed unthinkable for such a hero to be evil, and they were all grateful that someone so powerful wasn't on the opposite end of society. Stop standing there, Kacchan. You only have 7 minutes left. And of course those two don't seem to care. They watched as Bakugo grinned, immediately ignoring the intimidating aura that All Might had been giving off. He didn't seem amazed, and the hero smiled too, although his expression seemed sinister. I am a villain! Come at me, hero! Come at me? You don't have to tell me twice. The towering man slowly got closer, and the blonde held out his hand. Stun grenade! The explosive one barreled forward without thinking, but was caught face first by the fake villain. Bakugo grunted heavily as he raised his other hand up toward his target. Within seconds, a relentless barrage of explosions detonated from the palms, and All Might couldn't dodge from point-blank range. Reeling back the unending pain from the blonde's impressive power, the grip on the teen's face loosened, and Bakugo kicked off the teacher's chest to free himself. Jumping back to create some distance, the human grenade grabbed a fist-sized rock from the debris and lifted it high above his head before aiming it at the pro. Die! With his palm blowing up, the small and dense weapon bolted toward All Might, but the fake villain dodged to the side, narrowly missing the projectile. In a blink of an eye, Bakugo appeared in front of him with a succession of explosions. If you don't dodge, you might die! A gauntlet was pointed right at the number one's face as the other hand was looped around the pin. A malicious smirk was on the blonde's face as he yelled, Don't disappoint me, All Might! A violent burst of light discharged from the end as the sweat collected inside, all ignited and thundered forward, blowing up everything in its path. The ground before the boy had been upturned in the wake of the detonation, and the teen smirked as he saw his hero smile. That was very well done, young Bakugo. Too bad it wasn't enough. The huge man suddenly rushed forward, fist reeled back, ready for a punch, and Bakugo instinctively ducked. He wanted to know how All Might survived one of his most lethal attacks, and the boy couldn't help but beam as he saw the right arm of his idol's hero costume completely incinerated. I can't believe he could get some damage on All Might. Uraraka intensely watched the fight with excitement along with most of the other students in her class. The only ones who weren't there were Sero and Todoroki, as one was asleep and the other was in the staff room. Shinso was there too, although he stood in the back of the class. The boy didn't seem to want in on the class's chatter, but he did seem a little lonely standing in the corner. Momo saw this and ended up sitting on the sofa nearby, bringing Jiro with her, and the three of them exchanged glances before returning their attention on screen. AP shot! Immediately after blasting the potent detonation, Bakugo was almost flat against the ground as he ricocheted off his explosions. He then shot forward, slamming his palms onto the charred ground before rotating his body. Aiming an explosion for the pro's face, a billowing cloud of black smoke blinded their sight, and although the advantage was a double-edged sword, the teen didn't need to worry about obscured vision as he shot out like a missile. Rocketing up and into the air, the human grenade rotated his body with his explosions before spinning faster and faster. His body was accelerating as he headed for his idol, the menacing grin on his face wider than ever as he shouted out loud, "Howitzer impact!" Well, damn. Bakugo landed shakily, turning to grin at his friend before making his way over. The boy had poured everything he knew into the continuous volley of attack and was satisfied with what he could do in 7.5 minutes. Good job. Now it's my turn. Don't patronize me. Yeah, now sit back as I beat All Might into the dirt. The number one watched in confusion as the blonde he was fighting only moments ago suddenly backed down to sit where Izuku had. They seemed to exchange some words before the greenette headed toward him, a bottle of water in hand. What is the meaning of this? The freckled one just smiled before stretching his limbs out. It's my turn to fight you now. From the observatory room, the class sighed as they watched Izuku finish his water before chattering amongst themselves. I still can't believe Bakugo held out that long against All Might. That was so cool. That was so manly. He just went full out, didn't he? As the students babbled about how their explosive classmate had fared against the teacher, suddenly Izuku's voice caught their attention. All Might! The air around the greenette distorted as two clenched fists raised toward his chest. The grin on his freckled face was the picture of excitement as the boy gently jumped up and down on the spot. Don't hold back on me either! What? The hero staggered as the greenette seemed to disappear for a moment before reappearing right in front of his face, an arm pulled back, ready to punch. The light blue eyes of the number one flashed as he reacted, backing up to dodge before pulling back his own weighted arm. It didn't matter if the sudden increase in speed took him off guard. Experience allowed the teacher to react quickly as the air around his fist trembled, ready to pummel down. The muscles on the hero's body tensed as he shot forward. Where did he go? The class stood in shock as they were unable to process what had just happened. Not only did Izuku's speed take them all off guard, they were horrified when it seemed that All Might was going to punch the boy with all he had. As if the intensity of that one move wasn't enough, the surprise of their classmate being able to dodge the usual battle-ending punch made their hearts drop. Bakugo's fight against All Might was one thing, but this was something else. Their minds just couldn't comprehend what had happened as they looked at Izuku, body curved backward with his hands on the floor. He's on the ground? Before the fake villain could comprehend what had happened, Izuku's Iron Soul shoe came flying from the left side of his peripheral vision, and the number one could just barely react. The dust in the surrounding area was blown completely to the side. The greenette had spun around on his arms before cartwheeling back a bit to create distance. It had only been about 15 seconds since he and Bakugo had traded places, but the green-clad boy had already dealt a quarter of the damage his rival had. I know All Might's restrained and all, but wasn't that kick just now super strong? The children in the observation room had snapped out of their trance and were now asking questions when a tired voice spoke up. That problem child has been training non-stop after school every day. It will be more surprising if he couldn't deal that much damage. They turned to see Aizawa walking in with a coffee mug held in both hands. The homeroom teacher then started to explain what happened in the staff room the evening of the day they had returned from internships. The kid asked for permission to use ground gamma. Considering you all live in dorms now, I granted permission as long as you didn't stay out too late. On multiple occasions, he's already asked me and a couple other teachers to fight him at least twice a week, just like homework. You kids are expected to come to us when you want help to improve yourselves. A small murmur broke out among the class as they watched their classmate continue fighting against All Might when Mina realized something. But sir, internships were almost 2 months ago. Are you saying Midoriya's been training this whole time? The teacher nodded as he rubbed the back of his neck. His eyes were tired just from remembering how the greenette had asked for match after match until he fainted. He's also kept contact with Best Genist from what I've seen, and has used every opportunity to improve. It's not a requirement for you all to do that either. The kid has just given himself the resolve to push himself above and beyond. Plus ultra. All eyes were turned to the greenette who hopped on the spot, the grin on his face wider than ever. During the time he spent training after class, the boy had finally come to a realization. All the ways he had developed thus far were the result of his hidden, weak mindset. The boy had simply believed he had to adapt in order to overcome a quirk he thought was weak. It was true that increasing gravity had potential, but the boy had dismissed something crucial, and that was the strength to decrease gravity, the majority of his quirk. Best Genist had helped him realize this, and the boy was horrifically embarrassed for being so blind. So what if I can't increase as much? The potential to decrease gravity is just as infinite. I just didn't use any of my strengths and only focused on trying to hide my weaknesses. I guess it was helpful, but everything I was doing was just completely wrong. Look at me now. I feel light as a feather. Rotating on one hand, the boy swung his heels toward his idol's stomach, and the fake villain, taking a step back with his right leg, froze as he felt Izuku's other hand grab his left leg. His whole body was suddenly lighter, and the sudden change threw off his sense of balance. Before he could adjust, the greenette twisted while pushing off the ground and aimed a perfectly timed upward-facing dive to the pro's face. He caught it! Denki could barely squeak out the commentary as they watched the intense fight, and it seemed like All Might was about to turn the tables, the smile also not leaving the pro's face. He had rapidly adapted to the greenette's fighting style and was able to firmly stand his ground despite being thrown completely off guard. Just like I thought. Once he solidified a fighting style, he loses the amount of variety he can switch between. Exactly my problem with Mirio inheriting One for All. The pro took another fighting stance as he could now see the weakness in Izuku's fighting style. The problem in anyone's fighting style was that when they finally solidified their strengths, it created an unintentional weakness. It was the infinite potential of someone who hadn't settled yet that All Might wanted for his successor. One for All was the accumulation of power after all, and the user needed to adapt. Seeing Izuku embody the only problem he had against Mirio inheriting his quirk only further solidified his resolve to pass the mantle on to Bakugo. Dodging another one of the greenette's kicks, the teacher had come to his decision. He was proud to know Izuku had improved so much that their rivalry wouldn't be strained once the blonde inherited One for All. Once young Midoriya solidified his fighting style, his variety decreased. You settled too quickly, boy. Now I will end this fight with... The pro's thought process paused as pain shot up his leg. Izuku had flipped upside down once again and spun as if to aim a kick to the man's shoulder, but right before any contact was made, Izuku aimed a punch for All Might's shins and pain shot like electricity up his nerves. The pro was immediately brought down to one knee before he could react. The greenette spun once again and landed a clean hit to his face. I spent my whole life trying to strengthen my weaknesses. The only weakness I have is my own mind. I may not have the raw power Yurakachan do, but I do have the power to overcome it. Just watch me be the next #1 hero. The boy stood before him with one leg raised and both his arms clenched in tight fists. Spending his whole life covering for his weakness had not been in vain, because now he could be strong without restraint. Izuku had found his style. Oi, Planetoid, your 7.5 minutes are up! Hurry up and join me then! The blonde strolled to his side, eyes obviously impressed with what he saw as he tossed a water bottle at his friend. When did this happen? Well, I guess it doesn't matter. We can fight later. Now we're against All Might. Izuku grinned as he caught the water and drank it, replenishing his slightly dehydrated state, and pressed the cool plastic against his forehead. That's fine. Gravitoid will beat your ass to the ground later, too, for not remembering his name. Tossing the bottle to the side to pick up later, Izuku returns to his fighting position, and the best friends grinned. It had been a while since they had fought together. Is it just me, or is time moving really slowly? Mina slowly exhaled as she blinked rapidly. Just like everyone else, she had held her breath and refused to take her eyes off the match. They just couldn't compare to the level being displayed on screen. It's not just you. I can't believe it's only been 15 minutes, retorted Kirishima. With half their time used for the one-on-one fights, Team Midoriya and Bakugo were now together against the #1 hero. You better not hold back on us, All Might! Their speed blurred their bodies together as both teenagers shot forward, excitement vivid in their eyes. Their opponent's fists were primed, muscles twitching in power as it came crashing down, missing Bakugo by a hair when the blonde boy swiftly swerved to the left. Izuku ducked down, letting the wind pressure blow back his hair before flipping onto his hands, rotating and immediately aiming a kick. All Might's arms came thundering down to avoid the attack to his stomach, but the second he blocked, the human grenade unleashed a volley of explosions from his palms. The firepower detonated in their teacher's face, forcing the colossal man to stagger back, face charred a little from the heat. I can't believe it! Are they really pushing All Might back? It seemed unreal. They were watching the class's two powerhouses clash against the symbol of peace, and not only put up a good fight, but potentially a better one. Was taking down Japan's strongest really a feat possible for two teenagers? As much as the fight made their hearts beat with anticipation, it also grew a pit of uneasiness within their stomachs. You kids are both correct and incorrect. Azama once again helped clear the confusion as he explained the current situation. All Might is still holding back on them.
What?
The homeroom teacher nodded as he continued, tired eyes facing the fight on screen. It's true he's occasionally punching with all he has, but he's dragging out the fight so those two can fight against a strong opponent. As the tired man muttered something about the hero playing favorites, the class could feel the knot in their stomachs unfold and dissolve. Their eyes watched as the greenette on screen had changed his fighting style slightly again, but this time so did Bakugo. The two were fighting in sync with each other, and it caused the number 2 hero to unleash multiple air-shocking punches. That's not saying those two aren't strong. They're both a challenge in their own rights. They have a strong connection, and their flawless synchronization makes them a duo the other teachers would have trouble with. Izuku came crashing down after he had jumped above the symbol's head and forced All Might to dodge to the right, only for him to collide with an explosion from the human grenade. Their opponent responded by returning the smile and raising his own fist, charging forward with all the strength he had. The hero retaliated by lifting an arm to block most of the damage and suddenly rotated to grab the freckled one by his legs. Spinning like he was ready to throw, the number 1 pretend fiend suddenly tossed Izuku like he was a discus and caused Bakugo to shoot into the air. Grabbing his partner's arm, the blonde released small but potent explosions in quick succession as he would for a howitzer impact to slow the greenette's trajectory. Izuku immediately reduced Bakugo's gravity, and the two floated in the air as they watched the symbol of peace smile. Heroes! A large hand wiped the char on his skin away. It was still red and slightly blistered in some places, but the pain seemed non-existent as the fake villain stood proud. He may have been weakened, but All Might still had the power of One for All burning brightly within his body. The blonde reacted by unleashing an explosion from his gauntlets, and the detonation crashed down at blinding speeds. It was pounding down harder than ever with heat high enough to incinerate flesh, but to their surprise, All Might kept smiling. Sweat pooled down the hero's face, but he continued to stand tall. The never-ending torch from within was not something two children could put out, and it was evident as the symbol of peace glared up at them. He looked exhausted, but showed no fear as he yelled, "You shall not pass!" His voice shook the whole battlefield, and it became clear to the duo that this was their limit. They still had a canyon between where the hero and themselves stood, but they now knew where their footings were. It had been 10 minutes since they teamed up together, and that meant they had only 5 minutes of the exam left. They had agreed on this without words beforehand, so neither of them complained about the outcome. In fact, it made both boys grin to know they could get that much stronger. I knew he had to get hurt at one point. Izuku looked down at his body that was covered in bruises from just All Might's shockwaves themselves. He could still feel his legs aching from when the hero had tossed him, and his body was overall just strained from fighting so much. Bakugo was in a similar situation as he was covered in mild burns from his own explosions as well as bruises. The blonde even had a couple streams of blood, both fresh and dry, from himself that he hadn't bothered to take notice of until that point. They were both in bad shape, but the adrenaline in their bodies kept them going. Huh? We're going against All Might! You've lost brain cells if you thought anything else, dumbass! The two readied themselves as they had already agreed on an unspoken plan. Bakugo passed his friend the belt of grenades, and the greenette quickly strapped the explosions to his waist. It takes one to know one, dipshit. The two then stretched their tired bodies out as the greenette unclenched a fist. Within seconds, the two fell from the sky at an alarming rate toward the teacher, and Bakugo thundered down like a homing missile. He was ready to obliterate their target. Izuku felt a second slower as he was lighter than his partner, but it was proved to be on purpose as the teen avoided the blast and used the generated black smoke to hide his own attack. All Might narrowly dodged an upward axe kick to his stomach as he pulled his body back, regaining his bearings. The colossal man then punched toward the ground to clear the area. The wind pressure pushed both boys back into the air as Izuku decreased their gravity, but the greenette released himself, and he came crashing down once more. Landing on the pro's shoulders and digging his iron heels in, the teen dodged the arms coming up to grab him. Quickly rotating himself, he grabbed All Might's head from above, and in a swift movement, Izuku kicked the teacher's back. All Might was forced to straighten his body with his head pulled up, only to see Bakugo come barreling down to deliver another explosion. "There are 3 minutes left! Sir, are they going to fail?" Mina exclaimed. The class watched as the duo seemed to have no intention of passing the gates. It was becoming increasingly more difficult to see when they would make a run for it. Even if they seemed to stand a chance against the number one, it wasn't enough. It seemed like they were fighting until they failed. Well, that was until something caught their attention. "When did Mito Bro get those?" All interest turned to Izuku's waist, and they were greeted by the capture cuffs. The greenhead also had one of his partner's gauntlets strapped to his arm. "Wait, why didn't he use them earlier when he was on All Might's shoulders?" The class chattered among themselves, and Aizawa looked toward Momo. She had a look of uncertainty on her face, but Jiro prompted her to talk. A nod of confirmation from Shinso also gave the girl the confidence to speak out loud. "The cuffs only fit All Might Sensei at his wrists. For many of the other teachers, like Ectoplasm Sensei, they could fit elsewhere on the body. Even if Midoriya could reach All Might Sensei's wrists from the unbalanced position on his shoulders, there was a higher chance to win by running away, even though that much should be obvious." The girl glanced back at the screen to see both Izuku and Bakugo in the air once more. "I don't know why they would take out the cuffs now of all times. Oh, sorry, I don't know the answer." "Hey, it's okay. We didn't even think about if the cuffs would fit. Thanks, Yamamo." The girl smiled at her classmates' encouragement before they all turned back to the screen. There were only 2 minutes left. All Might sighed as he saw his opponent stretch out once more. "Out of ideas already? Well, that's to be expected." Before Bakugo could come thundering down, the fake villain punched the ground. The force cracked the concrete slabs into rubble and created an upward draft of air. The smokescreen wouldn't work now, but the tired students didn't seem fazed. The worn-out human grenade came down once more, but his trajectory was interrupted when blood gushed through his mouth. All Might had kicked the homing missile in the stomach with an audible crack, and Bakugo lay on the ground, coughing and drooling from the internal damage. The teacher turned away from the broken teen to then face Izuku, still floating in the air. "Don't think you kids can pull the same trick twice!" Izuku didn't answer as he unstrapped the belt and tied the small grenades to the gauntlet on his arm. Decreasing the gravity of the explosives so it floated in the air, the teen grinned. "Decrease!" To everyone's surprise, the grenades came thundering down at ridiculous speeds instead of continuing to float. The upward winds didn't seem to affect the trajectory as they detonated. A colossal cloud of smoke surrounded the area as the sound of smaller explosions going off caused the teacher to dodge around blindly. The grenades were small, but definitely potent. "Think fast!" Izuku came crashing down, cuffs in hand, and All Might could barely react when the greenhead appeared by his side. The gravity manipulator's hands were only centimeters away from his target's wrists, but... Texas Smash! The cuffs were thrown across the road, and the teacher stood alone in the rubble. Izuku was on the floor, battered and bleeding from taking the smash almost directly, the cuffs too far away for him to reach. The class watched as their classmates struggled to sit up and felt horrible as there were only seconds left. There was nothing that could be done. "Team Midoriya and Bakugo have passed the finals!"
What?
The screen changed to show Bakugo grinning from behind the gate, and they turned to Aizawa for answers. The homeroom teacher sighed before explaining, "That final explosion was just a mask for Bakugo's getaway. He blasted himself with his gauntlet and ran the rest of the way." All Might looked both shocked and proud at the two who passed, and went to pick up Izuku who had passed out. Just like that, the finals were over. "I'm sorry to say, but one of your classmates, Shoto Todoroki, has dropped out of UA." Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.